a mutual friend. We knew of each other quite extensively and somehow really hadn't met or had a chance to hang out, which both of us thought was a little surprising. And as we were chatting around during the conversation, of course, one of the topics that came up was leadership. And Glenn brought up a great approach and concern, which is why we aren't promoting more leadership and leadership development in the front lines, the rank and file, and some of the challenges that this presents, which has actually been a career theme for both of us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Glenn and hear a little bit about his background, and then we'll get into today's discussion.
Thanks, Hans. How are you today?
Doing wonderful, as good as it can be for a Monday. And you, sir?
I certainly appreciate the lovely introduction. That was very nice of you. Thank you. Listen, I've been around the traps in the world of business analysis, the world of project management, agile practices, and the likes. I've worked with large organizations and small organizations alike. And for me, doing business analysis and the technical stuff has always been easy. Process models are easy. Writing business rules are easy. Flow charts and diagrams, it's the easy stuff. You can slam it down in Lucidchart, you can slam it down into Visio and add some colors and make it look great. But what I've always found has been the real challenge is identifying gaps in what we do and being able to stand up with a degree of confidence and make those changes right down, as you say, on the front lines. After all, we are doing the hard work in the trenches. Who's better positioned than to make those changes? And I find far too often we as business analysts wait for management or the leadership team to direct those changes when they're so remote of what it is we're doing that they have no idea what changes need to happen, much less what the impact of the changes are that generally do happen. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. I think leaders think because they're setting the lighthouse, setting the strategic goal, that this means they need to make all the decisions on how to get there. And what I usually tell people is the group that is closest to the problem is usually the best one to solve it. So why aren't we letting them solve the problems they know that will work best? Yeah,
and sadly, there's also a common theme across every single organization I've worked with. And I'll bet you $100 that the folks on this broadcast would agree with me. And if you do, I want to see some text messages come through. I think there is a lack of trust. And I think leadership doesn't trust that we're capable of doing what we do best. After all, they hired us, and they hired us for specific reasons and specific purposes and for our competencies and what we're capable of doing. And yet they don't seem to trust that we're able to hold our hand up and say, there's a flaw in the process that we're engaging with.
Right. Well, it's easy to understand what management is and that command and control hierarchy, but what do we mean when we're talking about leadership? Because I think this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks we have to start with, is people confuse leadership and management. They believe leadership is something that happens 1 to 3 levels above them. But what should they be thinking about when they hear about us saying you can be and should be working to become a leader in your area, a leader in the organization? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, there's 2 ways to answer this, 2 very definitive ways to answer this, Hans. And that is, there's a great book out there, and if anybody can remember the author of it, it's called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's something that I have lived and set my standards by, yes, both as a leader and as a business analyst. And it very clearly states that if there's no trust, then there's always a fear of conflict. And what we mean by that is we don't want to engage leadership with these great ideas that we have for fear of being chastised or put down or disregarded. And if that happens, then there's a lack of ownership. If there's a lack of ownership, there's a lack of accountability. And that in turn turns itself into inattention to detail. Now, you said something earlier that folds beautifully into this, Hans, and that is the command and control side of things. And we have this command and control side of things, and then we're not in a good position to be holding up our hands as a leader and identifying those pain points that are causing us grief. So how do we overcome that? You're not going to like the answer. You're really not going to like, and a lot of people don't like the answer. We have to find it in ourselves to do two things. One, we have to find the courage to stand up to leadership. So how do we do that? We do it with what we know best, and that is providing data points to support and do business analysis to support whatever area of weakness we believe needs to be improved within a process or a methodology or a defined structure that we have to operate in.
Absolutely. And one of the keys here is it's stepping out, taking that risk, and being motivated enough to take the right action. In essence, you're volunteering yourself to do something that's right, that is above and beyond what, excuse me, what you're being asked to do. And I think that's why you can't tell someone to be a leader. And Steve posed an excellent question I'm going to get to in a second here. It's like being voluntold. I can't tell you to volunteer, or you really haven't volunteered. I can't tell you to be a leader. You have to step up. I can give you the safe space to do that. And Steve here asks, there's a hesitation from the front line when asked the question, are you now the lead for this project?
And that's systemic. That's systematic of an organization that lacks a lot of trust with its competencies and its core resources that are the lead of the project. If it were me, I'd be proud as punch to hold my hand up and say, yeah, I'm the lead of the project, and I'll take on whatever problems are going to, provided that you're willing to listen to the advice and the guidance that I am well positioned to provide. Yes, Patrick Lencioni was the author of that, Scott.
Yep, thank you, Scott. Yeah, and this is, you also mentioned it's kind of the two-way street. It's the trust and the safe space. Can we allow people to volunteer, to take an action, to present something that is counter without fear of reprisal or looking stupid? And part of that is they've got to trust that the leadership is giving them enough of a forum that the risk is acceptable. And the organization has to learn to trust the people that they have put in power. And I guess that part's really confusing for me, and I'd love to get your take on this. How is it possible to be a leader or a manager in the organization and not trust the people that you have working for you? Like, are you really building an organization with people you can't trust, you can't go to, you don't want to do their best job? In which case, what kind of an organization are you building? That part's always seemed at odds to me.
Okay, this is a brilliant question, and I just want to address, just before I address it, Ted Hicks said this is because it's associated with the question, are you the neck to choke? And this really concerns me when this type of question shows up in an organization. It absolutely is a telltale sign that there is a lack of trust within the leadership. Back to, and I'm going to fold that back into what you were asking earlier, Hans, and that is, what kind of organization are you working for where the management team and the leadership doesn't trust their staff or their organization to perform as they expect them to perform? Now we're getting into the very murky waters of culture and poor leadership, and nobody likes to do this. And what's even more interesting is nobody has the courage to perhaps speak to the leadership organization and say, there's a problem here, right? And you're in a leadership position and you don't trust the staff that you're working with. And as a consequence, there's no ownership, there's no accountability. And as a consequence to that, we're churning out shitty products.
Absolutely. One of my good friends and colleagues, Valence Howden, does a lot of coaching on governance, controls, those areas. And one of the ways he said it, and I've really latched onto it recently, is there's always accountability. There has to be, because stuff gets done. But are you making the right people accountable for the right things?
Here's the
And
thing. Yeah.
yep,
Here's the thing. And I'm sure you've seen this before, and I'm sure everybody in the audience has seen this before. We always say there's accountability, but at the end of the day, the reality is we're pointing fingers at everybody but ourselves. And as a consequence to that, there is no accountability. And dare I say it, this happens in financial institutions and insurance agencies because it's so easy to get lost in the numbers.
yep. And hopefully getting lost at least in some of the right numbers, let alone chasing the wrong numbers, like the infamous shareholder value.
That's
Oh,
right.
you mean something that should be an absolute byproduct of success? If we have an amazing company, we are taking care of our employees first so they can take care of our customers. We will have a successful organization as long as we are providing for our customers and our employees' needs. How could shareholder value not follow? Instead of, well, if our efficiency rating was 0.62 instead of 0.67, they would be happier.
That's you nailed it. You nailed it spot on. Listen, I headed up an organization down in Australia while I was living there, and we started out with 12 folks on the team. We ended up with 100 plus folks on the team. And the really interesting thing about it is, as a leader, I instilled trust in the team, and I allowed them to think creatively and to stand up and say, I think this is wrong. I think boldface, we should be doing something different. And I allowed for other team members to comment on it freely without consequence. And I think it's really important to emphasize this: without consequence. And the result of that was a greater sense of ownership, and surprisingly, a greater sense of accountability. Where something failed, it was a lot easier for somebody to stand up and go, shit, folks, I really screwed that up. And so the team was much more forgiving and a lot more willing to jump on board and provide advice and guidance to their peers to say, hey, listen, I can help with that. And so I think it's mission critical. And I do want to pull this back a little bit more and say, we're excellent as business analysts. We know how to do, and I said this at the top of the conversation, we know the details. We know how to put process models together. So why not take advantage of that to demonstrate the strengths and the weaknesses in that which we're doing? So you could plausibly stand up and say, look, I've been in the middle of this project method, this methodology. Here's an area of weakness. Here's the weak point. Here's a process model that shows how it can be much more efficient. What say you?
This is where I have, kind of a major issue with agile evangelists and agile practitioners. And I know what they're trying to say, but the way it's said has just never sat well with me. And that's the concept of fail fast, fail safe. And in principle, the idea is great. It's exactly what you were talking about, is things aren't going to go the way we planned. They're not going to work out smoothly. That these things are going to happen. Okay, let's take that, let's learn from it, and let's refocus and figure out how to get it done. To me, I understand trying to create the safe space so that people don't feel they're going to be blamed if the expected doesn't happen exactly the way they expected it to. But I've never considered that a failure. Like, it's the whole goal here is, are we taking the best approach that we know at that time? Let's course correct continuously to make sure we get where we're going, and we agree that we will recognize it when we get there. To me, the only failure in that model is not trying.
Yeah. I think we're drawing lines of confusion with that statement: fail hard, fail fast. And I would consider myself a self-proclaimed agilist, and I think what we're really talking about, fail hard, fail fast, is the product itself. And we want to be able to break the product as quickly as possible so that we can fix it. And I'm not really certain that it applies to the human environment that is even more critical than the product environment. So Hans, I think you're dead on with your comment, and that is, it's not an issue of failure so much as it is an issue of education, to overcome a hurdle or a distraction from that which we're doing. So look, I want people to, I'm trying not to use the word fail, but I want people to experience discomfort in their work environment. I want them to be challenged by it. If it's too easy, then chances are we're not pushing ourselves to the maximum. And that's, when we push ourselves to the threshold and it hurts, and we're struggling, then I think we're doing a good job. I really do. I refer back to the team that I had previously, and I challenged them to find, something really simple. Find a venue where we can host a professional development day. And you'll laugh at this, but I think it was interesting. Find a venue that's different. Find a venue that provides a wow factor. And while it's really, really simple, it's still project related. We had risks, we had assumptions, we had constraints, we had budgets, we had timelines, a lot of it. And one of the things I said to them is, give us the wow factor. And what came out of that was conference halls, hotel rooms. And I said, no, it's not good enough. And so when they finally stood up and the next round of this session, an amusement park was the place to do it. And I thought, wow, now we're talking. But we allowed them to stumble, struggle, spit, hiss, and be in an environment that was safe enough that they could do that. So I see this comment. There's a break the product, not the people. It's brilliant, Steve. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes into part of the blame. So when we're thinking about this, we can attack it from top down. And I know a lot of organizations try and do that.
Yeah.
But it is possible to build resilience and empowerment from the ground up. Definitely hard, but I can honestly say, when I'm telling success stories, when I'm telling the foundational moments in my career where I had the biggest impact, I did some of the work I'm the most proud of and led to better opportunities, I'm hard pressed to think of any that weren't a result of volunteering for something that was outside of my responsibilities or anything that I was authorized to do. I mean, there's a few things where I was involved with some teams, and that was kind of part of it, where we were trying to break the culture and trying to change things. But almost all the great things, like forming a BA Center of Excellence, it was a 3-year fight and battle. And I learned so much during that, and it ended up working. But it wasn't the fact that we were able to get it. It was the team and the value we built along the way that I'm proud of. So how do we help people escape from under the rock, or encourage them to stop trying to hide behind the rock and avoid volunteering, taking on more responsibility, becoming the leader that they are meant to be?
That's a tough question. And I think the answer lies somewhere between a topic that I absolutely adore, and I could go on for hours, and that is recognizing and understanding what each other's strengths and weaknesses are. I'm of the school of thought, and let me just back this up. I'll set some context around this. We as business analysts and project managers and scrum masters and so on and so forth, in our lifetime, will probably fill in, I don't know, 10 to 15 behavioral analysis charts to sort of advise and guide us on what our personality type is. And we get all kinds of groovy, funky scores, right? We get the IE2s and the red greens and the blues and the yellows. And, I'm all in favor of taking a quick snapshot in time and understanding what our behaviors are for that moment in time. But I'm more interested in understanding what our intrinsic behaviors are. So those that are hardwired within us. And I'm not going off the track. I promise you, I'll come back, Hans, to what can we do?
Keep going. I'm with you.
what we've discovered when we study intrinsic behaviors within individuals is A, that they're hardwired, and B, that we are born with them and we die with them. So they're consistent throughout our life. And the sooner we can recognize intrinsic values in others and ourselves, the easier it becomes to have a dialogue or a conversation with those individuals as it relates to their intrinsic value. Let me give you an example. I'll give you a really, really cheap example. Let's suppose that Hans is the anal, uptight, detail-oriented. I'm messing with
That
it,
was a
Hans.
little bit spot on, but go with it.
Okay, all right. So I've understood your intrinsic values, but incredibly detail oriented. What I don't want to do with Hans is have a conversation about high level strategic advice, because Hans is going to press me and really push for the details of that. And I'm not the detail guy. I'm just not. And I've always been like that. So how does that fit into the question that you asked earlier? How do I stand up and provide that leadership within the team and the organization? We've got to really learn and respect and appreciate that one person's strength is perhaps their weakness, and not to exploit their weakness, but to leverage their strength. And if that could be a bumper sticker, I'd have it over every car that we drove by. One person's weakness. We want to leverage their strengths more than we do their weakness. So if I'm a leader in an organization and I recognize that Hans is detail oriented, then I want to cut Hans loose and let him be as detail oriented as he possibly can to examine existing practices that are impeding his ability to perform at the best possible level that Hans can perform at. Conversely, if Hans is a real social animal, as I know he really truly is, then I want to leverage that and take advantage of it, and maybe cut Hans loose with all of the stakeholders and form a coalition of stakeholders that is providing some very rich guidance and detail on everything from culture to change management to graphic design and user interface changes and so on and so forth, so that he is performing again at his best possible capability. How do I leverage that and become the leader in myself? I think, Hans, just by virtue of us being astute and aware, and I've heard the term used a lot and everybody's probably very familiar with it, but it's that emotional intelligence we have to really ramp up so that we can muster up the courage to have those difficult conversations and switch gears and maybe talk strategy or talk detail or talk social or talk whatever the case might be. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. And our IQ is relatively set in life. We can improve and fine tune it a little bit. We can become more productive. We can certainly knock off IQ points, as I've been known to do from time to time. But emotional intelligence is a learned skill. It's like a rubber band that you can stretch and get more distance out of. And I really encourage people, and as Glenn was joking at the beginning, because except for the extrovert part, yes, I am very detailed, in the weeds, extreme introvert. And so emotional intelligence comes very hard for me. And anyone else who sees themselves this way, realize that, I'm now hosting a webcast on a semi-regular basis, because I'm not very good at the scheduling and commitment piece, but actually getting out in front, speaking at conferences. Like Amy's in the audience today and runs a fantastic series that I've mentioned many times, and is the one who brought Glenn and I face to face, surprisingly enough. But you can come and you can develop these skills. You could break out of your shell, and it's really worth investing the time and effort. A lot of people who may want to say, all right, I want to learn more about the domain. I want to learn a new programming language. I want to learn how to be fluent in UML and BPM process modeling. Yeah, those are good and those are helpful, but you will get a higher return on investment if you are working on emotional intelligence if you are putting yourself out there to develop your decision-making skills, your leadership skills, your interpersonal skills, it's like remodeling a house. It's putting money in the kitchen, not putting money into the basement that nobody really cares about. So really encourage people to build up and develop those skills.
You know what? I think I just fell in love with you, Hans. Because I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think it's I'm going to add one thing, and I'm going to say, and it's so critical to develop your own skills, but it's even more critical to understand where others are coming from. So
Yes.
the one thing that I would love to leave this audience with is, you know, we often say as business analysts, and you know, this is a whole other topic, Hans, I'd be happy to sit down and have a chat with you about that. You know, our primary skills and competencies and sets of skills is listening and communication, which I think are critical, but I don't think they're the most important. I think emotional intelligence falls into that. But if I could leave this audience with one thing, listening with intent is perhaps one of the most important things I've ever learned as an employee of any organization, as a human being. I'm not even going to say just as a business analyst. But we start listening with intent. And what I mean specifically by that is, as I listen to an individual, I want to know what is motivating them to say what it is they're saying. What is the intrinsic value behind that? Are they seeking out the details? Are they seeking out that high level broad brush strategy? Are they seeking out that social connection? What is it they're seeking out? Then I can carefully craft a response before I speak. So listen with intent, speak with intent.
Yep. And I just lost where I was going with the next thought. Oh, well, it was brilliant.
I know it was.
Yep. The other, I think another angle is this. So you mentioned that it's how we work with others, how we piece together. And it is more comfortable to work with people that are very similar to us most of the time. But there is a great value in diversity in your team, in your background.
Have to have it, yeah.
You know, if not, you're going to have everybody that is drawing the same box the same way, the same time. And if you want the status quo, you just want to maintain and fade away, that might be a good option. But I think a lot of us like to grow and improve, and being exposed to that different audience. One of my most influential career mentors was it is Dusty Rhodes, not the professional wrestler. He was a product marketing and branding guru, and just had the most wild and crazy life, from the Air Force to managing hotels to being one of the senior marketing managers for Pillsbury and a brand turnaround specialist. Just he sold 7 of 11 startups, and his background and mine ran parallel but really didn't cross. And I learned so much about how to sell ideas, how to pull teams together to get things done, how to get people focused on what's important. And there's one critical question that he always challenged me and everyone else with, and I think it's, core to what we're talking about. And the way he phrased it was, what are the 3 things that you do exceptionally well that the average person doesn't? Because in all his research and everyone he met, he found that the most successful people were devoting most of their time to the 3 things they did uncommonly well. They were exploiting that uniqueness, and it was the difference between being average and exceptional. Not fixing all of our faults, not worrying about some of the little details, but spending as much time as we can playing to our strengths. And I think it's one of the probably the most critical lessons I learned from him.
It's that which we are most passionate about will drive us to a degree of excellence. I don't disagree with that, and I think that's a great message for the audience. Find the three things that you do incredibly well. But I also am reluctant to, or I would hazard to say that, do those three things excellent and make an effort or an attempt. And you said it earlier, Hans, make an effort or an attempt to be that elastic band and stretch out your emotional intelligence toolkit to where you can have that dialogue and that conversation, those difficult dialogues and those difficult conversations with somebody whom you might be uncomfortable with having a conversation. It can only serve you well. It can only put you farther into a leadership position. And when I speak of leadership, I want to be clear about this. When I speak of leadership, Hans, I don't mean sitting at the helm and driving the boat. What I mean is being the individual who, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, and maybe it's becoming a theme, but being the individual who has the courage to stand up and say, I don't think so. Or maybe we could do it better. And that to me is a tremendous amount of leadership at its best.
Absolutely. And what's amazing, and I think people forget, is how small of an effort that is and what a big payoff or value it might be. Like,
Right.
And it's not necessarily even speaking up in a meeting saying, I don't think that's going to work. We're not even saying that, but what if you hear something in the meeting and you're like, I just don't know if that's right. Going back and finding it out and bringing it to the team's attention, or bringing it to a teammate who maybe has the influence, even if you don't have that influence or fear, and say, hey, we've got this issue. Here's what it is. And when I was building up a team and trying to break the command and control structure,
Good for you.
one of the key things I tried to do to create a safe space was the team wasn't going to buy in if it wasn't their solution. And not necessarily their idea, but they needed to be the ones to say, we select, that's what we agree, and that's what we want to do. So when we had to reach critical decisions, the team closest to the problem had to explain what the needed decision was. They had to come up with 3 options and their recommendation. And then we would discuss or share information, because maybe I had a little more information or perspective than they did. Maybe they had perspective that I didn't have. But at the end of the day, as a leader in that team, and in that case, a manager, we always went with the team's decision. We went with whatever option they selected and recommended, and that's what they had committed to. That's what they were committing to, and that's what their heart was going to be behind. And if it didn't work, what did we do? We figured out why it didn't work. Now, what are our new options, and how do we move forward? And, for me, that was one way to create a little bit of a safe space so the team could do what they thought was best, because everyone has good intentions. Let's assume good faith. But if it doesn't work, it's okay. We're not going to blame. As Steve Jones says, we're not going to put your head on the chopping block. We're going to move forward. What are some ways with your teams that you've been able to create that safe space, create that support without being overt and saying, my door is always open, everyone's a leader on this team, and those other statements that ring too hollow?
Listen, I want to acknowledge. I want to acknowledge what you said, and I think you're dead on with everything you've said. The other side of that coin is to acknowledge where good has been done as well, right? I find far too often our teams are reluctant to say, "Hey, Hans, what a friggin' great idea, man." So I think that's important to acknowledge. But I also want to. Steve Jones has just said something here. That I feel very passionately about. Leading also isn't about taking the credit. Too many leaders seem to misunderstand that. I'll tell you what, when I was, much like you've done, Hans, and I'm sure you would agree with this, but when I was running the team that I did, and it grew exponentially, I would very often say to my team, I didn't do anything. This is all on you guys. You did the work. And the leader that can really provide a backdrop to say, I'm humbly didn't do anything. It was the team that collectively did it. That's where the credit lands, I think, is the strongest leader that you're ever going to find. And if you do happen across that, you are very fortunate to have a leader like that.
One of the frustrating questions I get asked often is in groups that are switching to an agile delivery methodology and product delivery and team-based delivery, they're like, well, how do we evaluate the individual's performance? On a team, was the team successful?
Correct.
Was the team successful? Then everyone's successful. Well, yeah, but people do different amounts of work. Okay, then let the team figure out their peer feedback and their peer review, because if they're willing to carry the dead weight, who am I to argue with it if we're getting the results we're looking for? But most teams are very good about self-correcting or requesting that, an unproductive or a misfit team member gets replaced. Leave that at the team level. Judge, if you're going to have a team empowerment, then let's focus this on outcomes, not task completion.
I'm sorry, Hans, are you talking about ownership and accountability?
Oh, not intentionally at all. That wouldn't be a secret theme to the discussion today.
I think that's exactly what it is. Let the team take ownership of it and be accountable for their actions. I mean, how many times have you heard the old cliche, we're as strong as our weakest link? And if we can strengthen that, then collectively we're a strong team. We can have leadership acknowledge that and coach that individual or coach the team to excellence, and so much the better.
Yeah. And encouraging that, often we're afraid of conflict, but to be successful, a team needs productive conflict.
Yeah.
They need to mine for disagreement. And part of that is it's not attacking the person, it's discussing and challenging the ideas. Can we be open and honest? On one of the teams I was trying to help and continually, unfortunately, had to pull one of the senior people aside. They were brilliant. They were the domain expert for the old system and the old way of doing it. And we had to have them involved to continue. But the challenge was I couldn't have them in a meeting saying they knew how to architect the new solution when they really didn't. And the challenge I kept saying in private was, if you could really architect the solution, then what were you arguing about? If you knew the answer and how this should be designed, why was there an argument and you all weren't able to work together if you all had the same understanding? And the big challenge was they weren't arguing about the right things or the same things. And it took a while to acknowledge that some of the assumptions that were true in the past might not be true in the future. And can we figure out how to make things work? Because if we're continuing to argue, then we don't understand what the other person's saying. And now I remember the super brilliant point that I had earlier, and it latched on to one of the things you said. In my keynote, I've got a section where I talk about the need to not listen to respond, but listening to understand. And too frequently in these discussions, we listen so that we can win the argument, we can get our point across, we can show that we're smarter, better, more informed than the other people, instead of challenging ourselves for the much harder task of, am I listening to understand what they say and mean?
See, and you know what? I'm going to dovetail off that and suggest that goes back to the intrinsic value comments that I made earlier. And if we really start to study and examine those people, look, I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with I'm giving broad brushstroke generalizations, but if you're an individual who is data driven, whose intrinsic values is to present data or to seek out data. So let me give you some examples, some really cheap ones. it would take you forever to buy a car because you'd need to know everything about that car or the cars that you're buying, right?
Right.
You might even build a spreadsheet to do a comparative analysis of the vehicles that you're about to buy. And it's very difficult for you to make a decision given the lack of data you perceive that you have, right? And so we've learned by studying people who are motivated by these values that they generally tend to be very argumentative. Why? Because the world is black and white. I've got the data in front of me. It is what it is. You can't argue it. But conversely, in a strategic perspective or a social perspective, I might be able to argue it 7 different ways. And back to what you said, Hans, if we're not listening with intent, if we're not listening to respond, not with an argument or a response for the sake of responding, then chances are we're going to encounter conflict right out of the gates. Because if I said to you strategically, Hans, no matter what you do, you've got a budget of $6, you can do all the research in the world, you're going to be on a skateboard. And this is where the world of requirements and business analysis collides beautifully with it, where we have to understand what our stakeholders are saying or not saying. So we have to have the courage to stand up and say, here's some data. I know I might not be wrong, and I know the strategy is this, but we strongly believe a solution should look like this.
Yep. Steve brings up another excellent question here. Does the ability of listening to understand change with different levels of confidence?
I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say it comes with experience. And Hans, earlier you talked about, and I love the comment that you made, the rubber band comment of expanding and contracting and working with it. The more experience you have in stretching out that rubber band, the more confidence you'll have that will come naturally to you. So I would say junior business analysts out of the gates are probably not your most ideal candidates to stand up and challenge the executive management team. But by the same token, I would confidently say to you, I would surround myself with college kids faster than anybody else because I want a fresh and different perspective. But that's only because I'm willing to listen, and I can listen with intent and go, yeah, okay, that's a rookie thing to say, but I'm going to take it on board, and I think there might be some merit to it.
And if we're talking about self-confidence, then absolutely. If
Yes.
I'm secure in who I am and what I'm doing, then it is much less likely that I'm going to be threatened with other ideas. And actually, to your point, like putting college kids and other people with different backgrounds, it can be invigorating hearing things because you're not perceiving them as a threat. But that doesn't even have to be confidence, because if I'm in a domain with people that have ideas or a topic that I just don't understand, if I'm not threatened by their knowledge, then listening to understand is really easy because they're the experts and I know I'm not. I think the key here is not feeling threatened when people don't agree with you, have a different perception, maybe different value framework, and being able to listen and try and see things from their perspective, and then deciding, does it have a place in your world? And if so, what is that? And I'll shoot a quick example and then go back to you, Glenn. Is I, from time to time, will read information and arguments that are extremely counter to what I believe. And I'll pick an easy one, the flat earthers. And part of it is, at no point do I think they are ever going to convince me that the earth is flat, but it serves 2 purposes. One is it's amusing as heck to see how they're arguing this stuff. And to me, that's gold, like watching a comedy show. But the other is trying to understand how people can take information, form a construct or a conclusion based on faulty logic, faulty data, or persuasion, and turn it into a whole construct that is, you started with a few simple things like, why when I look at the horizon does it look flat, to now the whole earth must be flat because I can only see 13 miles. To me, I want to understand how people can be that ill-informed. And that's the politest way I'm going to say it here, because everything else you're not allowed to say in kindergarten.
Oh, we're going to have fun with this one because your data mindset is telling you that the earth isn't flat, but you know what? I think to listen to, and I congratulate you. I say kudos to you for listening to them. Maybe there's some merit to it. We're not always right. And I think the more you listen, and that's why I say kudos to you for listening, the more educated we get and the more confident we might get about our own stand and position. So my silly example, and I mean, no offense by this, but my silly example used to be I would make fun of Jehovah's Witnesses all the time. The people that knock and ring on your door and offer you free books and whatnot. And it wasn't until I let them in the front door and listen to what they have to say. And not unlike you, Hans, with your flat earthers, I completely disagreed, but I was much more pleased that I was educated and could now be less ignorant about a topic than I was previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's usually, like, every joke starts with a ring of truth. There's a ring of truth in almost everyone's belief. How they have constructed it, what they choose to do with it, can vary greatly, and it's worth understanding. One of my favorite books, Variable Star by Spider Robinson and blank it out. Anyway, said that there are two types of people in the world: those who are afraid of change and those who embrace it.
Yeah.
And more wars and more conflict have come between disagreements between those two groups than probably any other single cause. And the more I thought about that, it really kept coming back to, if my beliefs, if whether it's on a project, whether it's my global moral philosophy, if my ideas can't survive hearing contradictory claims and information, then how stable and valid are my beliefs?
Right.
I should be. Go ahead.
No. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. Keep going.
Yeah, if I really believe and I really think I'm right, I should be able to listen to contrary arguments and come away and say, you know what, that was a good argument. Those were valid points. And I'm even more convinced that my previous opinion was correct, or previous belief. It should strengthen it if you form the right conclusion. So I look at flat earthers and their arguments, and it's like, okay, not dissing them and what they're saying, but their information and their way of doing it is actually stabilizing and saying, yeah, I'm going to stick with the round earthers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, look, and if we look at that through the lens of this very topic, leadership in the ranks, I think those who educate themselves with, and it goes back, I feel like I'm repeating myself, Hans, it goes back to listening with intent. And the more we listen with intent, the more educated we become. And the more educated we become, the more the more experience we are willing to take on and embrace for the sake of presenting an argument, not for the purposes of pure conflict, but for the purposes, for the better of an organization, for the individual, the project, the product, the service, whatever the case might be. And then the last thing that I'll add to that is, I was going to say it earlier when you were talking about the two types of people and the three characteristics of people. One of them has to be passion. If you're not passionate about what you believe in, it's going to be a tough argument time and time again, every single time.
Yep. And, for people that are interested in that, Daniel Pink has a wonderful series and a TED Talk on what really motivates us. And, no surprise, it's not money, it's not compensation. And when we talk to a lot of people, they often say, I'm not looking for recognition. And that's usually hard to believe. But the key that I found is, I'm not looking for public recognition or award, because I did my job well, or even I stepped up and went above and beyond. I'm looking for acknowledgement that you appreciate what I did. And I think that's where that listening for intent comes in. If you can find times, find opportunities throughout your day, throughout your project, throughout your product lifecycle, to recognize where people are contributing and adding value, and acknowledge that. You don't need a certificate. You don't need the Montgomery Award for outstanding achievement in the field of excellence, although I do have a certificate I print for people for fun from time to time. Just simply saying, you know what, that is a great point. I appreciate you researching and finding that, so that we can have a better discussion. And I think that's where we're creating a little bit of that safe space, so that people will feel more free to challenge ideas, to step up and find out that leadership really does suit them.
And when done from within the ranks, it's more leadership than the person sitting at the top.
Yep. So I had a wonderful conversation, as I knew we would, thinking about, our topic, leadership in the ranks, and trying to empower and encourage people to live up to their potential and discover that it's worth the risk, and the payoff and the satisfaction is amazing, even though, honestly, we'll take some lumps along the way. We all have and will. What are some parting thoughts? What is parting advice you have for people who are either trying to encourage teams and people to step out of the shadows, or the people who may be hiding in the shadows and just don't quite want to step out into the light yet?
Yeah, what are my parting thoughts? Listen, this is a really difficult one, and I think, Hans, it's definitely circumstantial. But if you are seeking out leadership in what I think is its truest sense, I think leadership is being that guide, that mentor, that advisor. Then have the courage to step out of your uncomfortable zone, and be prepared to take a couple on the chin and not take it personally. The other thing is, if you can do that, make it about something, make it about the product, make it about the service, make it about the team, but certainly don't make it about yourself. When you do make it about yourself, then you're inviting conflict, because it's, and I hate to say this, Hans, and it doesn't sound very nice, but it's not about you. It's about the greater good of the team. It's about the product. It's about the service. Yes, your contribution is critical. Yes, your competencies and skills are critical. But at the end of the day, we're working for the greater good, and have the courage to be constructive. And I'm going to say this for Steve, because Steve has mentioned it, but you got to listen with intent, man. You really do, and really understand what is being said by stakeholders, by other leadership members, and respond with a degree of certainty, but respond with intent as well.
Yeah. And I want to tie in, Scott Davis, joining us from YouTube, said, when you acknowledge, they rise.
Yeah.
And that's really, a lot of times, think about how many times people have been blamed or beaten down for doing the right thing, or being blamed. If we can acknowledge them for the positive contribution, we can help them get over some of that fear of retaliation and start to build that trust. So take those opportunities to strengthen the team and help them move forward. I think, for me, it's a path that I recognized early on that I needed to change who I was to have the kind of life and influence that I wanted to. And early on, my theme or motto, and I think I'll add it here as my parting thought, was simple changes that make big differences.
Yeah.
You don't turn the boat all at once. You don't save the environment, save the world, change our entire culture and, you know, belief system. But can you be nice to each other? Can
Yeah.
you be encouraging? Can you acknowledge? Can you pick up a piece of trash and throw it away, or grab a loose shopping cart and put it in one of the racks as you're walking into the store anyway? These are really small changes, but what they add up, and they add up frequently. And the more you can, as Glenn has said so well, listen with intent and build that trust and build that teamwork, you're teaching other people how to listen with intent. And that's where we get our economy of scale, is by sharing our tips, supporting each other. Every person we influence is going to influence someone else. And that's how we turn things in a better direction. If not, you know, the laws of thermodynamics say everything will always return to chaos and disorder. We have to actively put in an amount of energy each and every day just to keep things where they are, and a little bit extra to point them in the direction we want. It's worth it. Take the risk and reach out to somebody. Reach out to people like Glenn, that is a tremendous thought leader and coach and mentor. Reach out to other people that you know, that you respect, and I'll bet they're willing to take some time for you, to offer some advice, to point you in the right direction. And, you know, search out those sources of information that can help you get there. So Glenn, wonderful as always to talk to you. I wish we could spend all day just having chats like this. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where that is our full-time job, but thank you so much for taking time out this evening.
What a pleasure, Hans. And can I give a big shout out to Amy, who I know is on the line.
Yes.
For bringing in and connecting us, and Scott Davis, who is a mentor of mine, joined us this evening. So big shout out to Scott. Thank you, everybody. It's Hans, what a brilliant job. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor to have you. Look forward to many sessions. And before too long, hopefully our paths will cross at a live event coming up. If anyone is really interested, especially in the audience with project management, business analysis, product management, agile, those spaces, check out Project Summit Business Analyst World or Project World Business Analyst World. Search those, and that's the conference series that Amy puts on. There will be live events this fall. Orlando's kicking it off, and it is going to be fun. Just a tremendous wealth of thought leaders. So, okay. Looking forward to it. I was like, oh, I'm getting the
sorry.
I'm listening with intent.
Yes.
So check out those events. We'd love to see you in person if you get the chance. So Glenn, thanks again, and look forward to talking with you again on another exciting topic.
Thank you.
And thanks, Scott Davis. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to meeting you as well, too, sometime.